In 1994, if you walked into literally any major city or suburb, you would see these just unshakable fortresses of retail.
Right, the absolute giants.
Yeah, I mean, places like Sears, Circuit City, Borders Books, Blockbuster, they didn't just feel like companies. They felt like, institutional pillars of American life.
Permanent, completely unbeatable.
Exactly. Permanent. But you fast forward a few decades, and they are essentially ghost stories now. And what killed them it wasn't some overnight disruption.
No, it's slow.
Yeah, agonizingly slow. It was this very specific disease called corporate inertia.
Which is just the worst way for a company to die, honestly.
It really is. It's the endless meetings where absolutely nothing gets decided. It's having all these layers of middle managers whose only real job is to just say no to things.
Right, protecting the status quo.
Exactly. It's making those comfortable, safe choices that just slowly bleed a legacy giant completely dry. Corporate inertia is basically the silent killer of modern business. But today, we are looking at the ultimate antidote.
We are dissecting a system of just relentless, aggressive, and frankly entirely counterintuitive execution strategies. Strategies that were specifically designed to basically murder corporate inertia in its crib.
Welcome to this Decode Deep Dive. Today, we are stepping into the shoes of industry peers to pull apart how a tiny, threadbare startup in a Bellevue, Washington garage morphed into the most unstoppable global force in modern commerce.
Company.
Yeah. We are looking at the operating principles of Jeff Bezos, and we're drawing heavily from Brad Stone's definitive book on the subject, The Everything Store.
And according to the book, the roadmap for this deep dive is incredibly dense. I mean, we are going to explore this psychological hack known as the Regret-Minimization Framework.
Yeah, I love that one.
It's so good. Plus the self-reinforcing math of the Customer-Centric Flywheel, a very intense cultural concept called weaponized frugality.
Weaponized frugality, yeah.
The bizarre two-pizza team structure, and of course the absolute banning of PowerPoint in favor of these intense six-page narratives.
So the goal here is simple. Whether you are currently managing a massive team or, launching a side hustle or just trying to navigate your own career without getting bogged down by the status quo, these operating principles are a masterclass in breaking the rules.
They really are. It is about fundamentally rewiring how an organization or even just an individual thinks and acts in a hyper-competitive world.
Right. Because before you can execute on a massive scale, you need a mental framework to make that terrifying leap to start in the first place.
You cannot change an industry if you are, too paralyzed by fear to quit your comfortable day job.
And the context here is super crucial because Bezos had an incredibly comfortable day job. Let's set the scene because this isn't your classic story of a desperate college dropout with absolutely nothing to lose.
Not at all.
It's 1994. Jeff Bezos is 29 years old, and he is a highly successful vice president at a very secretive, incredibly lucrative Wall Street quantitative hedge fund called D.E. Shaw.
And this wasn't, your typical aggressive testosterone-fueled trading floor either. D.E. Shaw was a really unique beast.
Yeah, how so?
Well, it was pioneered by David E. Shaw, who was this former Columbia University computer science professor. So the firm was essentially a technology incubator that just happened to trade stocks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were using supercomputers and immensely complex mathematical formulas to exploit these tiny market anomalies. It was a firm completely built by scientists and physicists and mathematicians.
And Bezos, strangely enough, according to the book, he was sort of the token extrovert in a firm full of brilliant introverts.
Right, the loud guy.
Yeah, he was known for this booming, honking laugh that would just echo down the hallways. But he was also completely absorbed in the work culture there. I mean, he literally kept a rolled-up sleeping bag in his office so he could just sleep under his desk during massive, multi-day sprints.
Which is wild.
He was making phenomenal money. He had the respect of a visionary boss. And he was working at the absolute bleeding edge of finance and tech.
Which is exactly what makes his departure so fascinating. I mean, what possesses someone to walk away from a guaranteed massive Wall Street bonus right in the middle of the year?
The catalyst was actually a newsletter, right?
Yeah, specifically the Matrix News newsletter. It was written by a Texas-based author named John Quarterman.
So Bezos he's scanning this newsletter in early 1994, and he stumbles across a single statistic that just stops him cold. Web usage was growing by a factor of 2,300 a year.
Or, to put it in percentages, a 230,000% annual increase.
Unbelievable growth.
It is,
Oh.
though in a highly ironic twist for a Wall Street quantitative analyst. Brad Stone's book notes that Bezos often repeated this exact statistic in later speeches and actually made a slight math error when he cited the percentage early on.
That is hilarious. But honestly, the exact decimal point didn't even matter. The trajectory is what mattered. Things in the physical world simply do not grow by a factor of 2,300 in 12 months.
Right. That isn't a trend. That is a fundamental reorganization of society.
Exactly. He saw that number and realized the window to get in on the ground floor of this whole new infrastructure was closing rapidly.
So he takes this nascent idea, this concept for an everything store that leverages the infinite shelf space of the internet, and he takes it to his boss, David Shaw.
And they go for a walk.
A very long walk.
This is one of those legendary moments in business history. They take a 2-hour walk in Central Park. Bezos is pitching this wild idea to sell books and eventually literally everything else over a computer network that most Americans still didn't even understand.
And Shaw, being a very rational, brilliant mentor, he listens patiently and gives him basically the most logical advice possible.
What do you say?
He says, Jeff, this is a really good idea, but it would be a much better idea for somebody who didn't already have a great job.
Ouch. I mean, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. It does. Shaw was applying standard risk assessment. When you have high status, high income, and high security, the opportunity cost of starting from zero is astronomical. Shaw was essentially telling him, do not throw away a golden ticket for a lottery ticket.
Which puts Bezos in a massive bind. He takes a few days to mull it over. And this is the exact moment he invents the Regret-Minimization Framework. And I really want to spend some time on this because this isn't just a business strategy. This is a profound psychological tool.
It truly is.
Yeah.
Because to understand why it's so powerful, we have to look at how humans are biologically wired.
Right.
We are driven by a cognitive bias known as loss aversion. Evolutionarily speaking, immediate threats and immediate losses are far more dangerous to our survival than, abstract future gains.
Yeah, the whole bird in the hand thing.
Exactly. If you have a bird in the hand, your brain screams at you not to risk it for two in the bush because dropping the first bird might literally mean starvation today.
Right. So if you sit down and make a standard pros and cons list for quitting a hedge fund to sell books on the internet, the con side is heavy and it is immediate. You lose your salary today, you lose your title today, you lose your trajectory today.
And the pro side is entirely hypothetical.
Exactly. It's like, well, maybe in 10 years I'll be a billionaire. Biology dictates that the immediate pain is always going to outweigh the hypothetical gain. Your own brain actively sabotages your massive ambitions.
Yes, because a pros and cons list measures current risk. The genius of the regret-minimization framework is that it completely bypasses that biological trap. It shifts the perspective from current risk to historical risk.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
According to the book, Bezos mentally projected himself forward in time. He imagined himself at age 80, sitting in a quiet room, just looking back on his life as a finished narrative.
It's basically a mental time machine. You pull yourself out of the panic of like a Tuesday morning and force yourself to view your life from the finish line.
Exactly. And from that 80-year-old perspective, Bezos asked himself two questions. First, when I am 80, will I regret walking away from my 1994 Wall Street bonus right in the middle of the year?
And the answer was instantly clear.
No. An 80-year-old man does not care about a specific cash bonus from 50 years ago. The emotional weight of that immediate loss just evaporated.
But the second question is the kicker, right?
Right. Will I regret not having participated in this thing called the internet that I deeply believed was going to be a revolutionizing event?
And the answer to that was a visceral, agonizing yes.
Yes. He knew that if he stayed at the hedge fund and just watched the internet revolution happen from the sidelines, it would haunt him for the rest of his life.
Wow.
By projecting into the future, the fear of missing the narrative became vastly more painful than the fear of losing his current paycheck.
Just think about how you could apply that to your own life, whether it's taking a new job across the country, starting a podcast, or, just asking someone out. In the moment, the fear of rejection or failure feels overwhelming. But if you ask your 80-year-old self, will I regret looking foolish for a week when I was 30? The answer is no. Will I regret never knowing what could have happened? The answer is almost always yes. It just forces clarity.
It strips away all that short-term noise. Once Bezos applied this framework, the decision wasn't just easy, it was mandatory. He packed up his life, his wife Mackenzie took the wheel, and they literally drove across the country to start Amazon in a garage in Bellevue.
But here's the harsh reality of business. A psychological framework gets you out the door. It gives you the courage to start.
Right.
But courage does not pay the server bills. Once you leap into the void, you need a sustainable engine to keep the company alive and moving forward. And that brings us to the core economic engine of this entire operation, the customer-centric flywheel.
The flywheel is really the mechanical heart of the company, and the concept itself was actually adapted from the management expert Jim Collins.
The author of Good to Great, right?
Yes. According to the book, Bezos actually brought Collins in to speak directly with his executive team in the early days.
Collins is famous for this concept of a self-reinforcing loop. Like, a flywheel is a massive, heavy mechanical wheel. It takes an immense amount of effort to push it for that very first rotation. But once it starts spinning, its own momentum helps carry it forward.
Exactly.
If you keep feeding energy into any part of the loop, the entire system accelerates.
And the Amazon executives took Collins's abstract concept and sketched out their own highly specific, highly aggressive version of it. And it's really worth walking through the exact mechanics of this loop because it dictates every single decision the company makes.
Let's break it down then. Step 1 is the catalyst for everything, lower prices.
Right. If you offer consistently lower prices than your competitors, what happens? It leads directly to the next step, which is more customer visits. People talk, word of mouth spreads, and your traffic increases.
And more customer visits lead to a massive volume of sales. Now here's where the loop gets really interesting. It doesn't just stop at high sales. That massive centralized volume of eager buyers acts like gravity.
Yes, it attracts commission-paying third-party sellers to the site. Independent sellers realize they just can't match Amazon's foot traffic, so they list their own products on Amazon's platform, paying Amazon a cut for the privilege.
So now Amazon has exponentially more inventory without even having to buy it themselves.
Which leads to the next crucial step, maximizing fixed costs. Amazon has to build these massive billion-dollar fulfillment centers and sprawling server farms just to exist. Those are fixed costs.
Right.
But with all those third-party sellers pushing volume through those exact same warehouses and servers, Amazon extracts vastly more efficiency and revenue out of the infrastructure they already built.
The cost per unit shipped basically plummets. They become hyper-efficient. And that unprecedented efficiency generates massive amounts of free cash flow.
And what does Amazon do with that cash? Do they pay it out in dividends?
Yep.
Do they give executives massive bonuses? No. They inject it right back into step 1. They use that cash to lower prices even further.
And the wheel just spins faster. Lower prices, more traffic, more sellers, more efficiency, even lower prices. It is a brutal, perpetual motion machine that absolutely crushes competitors who are trying to extract high profit margins.
But it's vital to note that Amazon didn't just stumble into this perfect pricing model immediately. In the early days, they were experimenting with complex pricing schemes, targeted discounts, and, shifting margins based on user behavior.
The real turning point came from a meeting with a retail legend, right?
Yes, Jim Sinegal, the founder of Costco.
This is such a brilliant anecdote. In 2001, Bezos meets Sinegal for coffee at a Starbucks in Bellevue. And Sinegal is this gruff, plain-speaking, mustache-wearing veteran of the retail wars. And he basically gives Bezos a masterclass in retail philosophy.
According to the book, Sinegal explained the fundamental premise of Costco, which is everyday low prices. He told Bezos that there are fundamentally only 2 kinds of retailers in the world. There are those who spend all their time and energy trying to figure out how to charge their customers, more tweaking margins, upselling, creating perceived exclusivity.
Right, the traditional model.
Exactly. And then there are those who spend all their energy figuring out how to charge their customers less.
Sinegal argued that the second approach builds an unbreakable bond of trust with the consumer. Like, if the customer inherently knows that they are getting the best possible deal every single time they click buy, they stop comparison shopping. They just default to you.
And Bezos heard this, went back to the office, completely abandoned the complex pricing algorithms, and initiated massive, across-the-board price cuts. He committed to being the retailer that figures out how to charge less.
But here's the thing. Committing to everyday low prices is just a philosophy. And a philosophy is completely useless without execution.
So true.
If the flywheel is built entirely on the premise of customer trust, trust the belief that Amazon is always fighting for the customer, you need a mechanism to enforce that trust internally. You need a way to ensure that as the company scales to hundreds of thousands of employees, nobody gets sloppy.
And Bezos's enforcer for this is legendary. It is a communication tool that strikes absolute paralyzing terror into the hearts of Amazon executives. It is internally known as the SEVB, or more commonly, the question mark email.
It is a brilliant but terrifying management tactic.
Yeah.
Let's picture this scenario for a second. You are a senior vice president at Amazon. You oversee a massive division, thousands of employees, millions of dollars in daily revenue. You are in back-to-back meetings all day.
Right.
Suddenly, an email hits your inbox directly from Jeff at Amazon.com. You open it. The body of the email is completely empty except for a single character, a question mark.
And attached below that single question mark is a complaint from a single everyday customer who emailed Bezos directly. Maybe a package was late, maybe a refund in process, or maybe a product recommendation was just weird.
But stop right there. A single question mark. I gotta be honest, that doesn't sound visionary to me. That sounds like a CEO who's dangerously micromanaging his team.
It does feel that way.
Yeah, like how can a global company scale if the boss is acting like a rogue customer service rep, hyperfixating on one missing package in Ohio? It just sounds toxic.
It definitely looks like toxic micromanagement on the surface, absolutely. And for the executive receiving it, it certainly feels toxic in the moment. But you have to look at the underlying mechanism of why Bezos does this.
Okay, why?
Because Amazon is a company built entirely on data. They are hyper-reliant on metrics. They track every millisecond of a user's journey. But Bezos understands a fundamental flaw in data. Metrics can have massive blind spots. Averages hide outliers.
Right, so if your on-time delivery metric is 99.9%, the dashboard glows green. Everyone claps. But that 0.1% failure rate might represent 10,000 furious customers.
Precisely. The question mark email isn't about Bezos personally trying to solve one specific order for one specific person. It is a randomized human audit of the metrics.
Ah, I see.
When Bezos forwards that complaint, he is operating on the assumption that if one customer took the time to write a detailed email about a bizarre failure, the automated systems are likely doing the exact same thing to thousands of other silent customers.
It's an anecdote exposing a defect that the cold, hard data is just hiding. So what actually happens when an executive gets this email?
It triggers an immediate drop everything fire drill. The executive cannot just, refund the customer and move on. They have to stop whatever they are doing, mobilize their entire team, research the specific problem, find the systemic root cause of why it happened, and write a comprehensive, heavily scrutinized explanation of how the entire system will be permanently fixed so it never happens again.
Wow.
And that response is reviewed by layers of senior management before it ever even goes back to Bezos.
There is a perfect, somewhat hilarious, and deeply revealing example of this from the research. The lube crisis of late 2010.
Yes, the lube crisis. It perfectly encapsulates the collision between automated metrics and human trust.
So Bezos discovers this massive issue. Customers who were browsing the sexual wellness category on Amazon,
Right.
specifically looking at personal lubricants, they were suddenly receiving these highly targeted, personalized follow-up emails right in their personal inboxes, promoting various intimacy gels and lubricants.
Just imagine sitting at your desk at a corporate job. You open your personal email, and right at the top is a brightly colored, highly targeted advertisement from Amazon suggesting you buy personal lubricant based on your browsing history from 3 days ago.
It's horrifying. It's a massive violation of privacy and dignity.
Yeah.
And Bezos was absolutely furious. He sent the question mark email, and then he dragged the senior executives responsible for email marketing into a conference room.
Yeah.
And here's the crazy part. The executives actually tried to defend the emails.
They really did. They fell back on the metrics. According to the book, they brought data to the meeting showing that these specific products were common, they were sold in standard drugstores, and most importantly, they proved that this specific email marketing channel was highly profitable.
Of course it was.
The algorithm was working perfectly. People were clicking and buying.
They looked at the spreadsheet and basically said, Jeff, this makes us money. And Bezos completely snapped. He didn't care about the spreadsheet. He demanded to know who in the room was going to stand up and shut down the entire marketing channel immediately.
Right then and there.
Yes, he was willing to instantly kill a proven, highly profitable revenue stream because it was causing customers embarrassment.
And that is the absolute crux of the flywheel. If you sacrifice customer trust for a short-term bump in profit, like optimizing for lubricant sales, while making your customers feel spied on, the flywheel shatters. The trust evaporates, the customer visits drop, and the wheel just grinds to a halt.
Right.
The question mark email is the brute force mechanism that ensures customer obsession always overrides short-term metrics.
It's a fascinating way to basically pressure test the algorithms with raw human emotion. But here is the catch with the flywheel. If you are guaranteeing everyday low prices to the customer on the outside, your margins are going to be razor thin.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot survive if your internal corporate overhead is just bleeding cash.
Yeah.
The only way the math of the flywheel works is if you enforce absolute, ruthless austerity on the inside to fund those discounts on the outside.
Which leads us to a cultural cornerstone of the company that is very famous in the tech world: weaponized frugality.
Weaponized frugality. I just love that term.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just about saving a few bucks here and there. It was a full-blown ideology. And it started from the very first days in the Bellevue garage.
It really did. And the most iconic symbol of this is the door desk. When Bezos was initially setting up the garage office, he obviously needed desks for his first few employees.
Sure.
But instead of going to an office supply store and buying proper desks, he drove down to a local Home Depot. He found that these solid core blonde wood doors were selling for about $60 each.
$60.
Yeah, so he bought a stack of them, bought some cheap 4x4 wooden posts, and literally bolted the legs to the doors to create makeshift desks.
It's a classic scrappy startup story. But the wild part is that it didn't stay a startup phase. As Amazon grew into a multi-million and then multi-billion-dollar publicly traded giant long after they could afford normal furniture, employees were still working on desks made out of doors. It became almost a religious symbol for the company.
They formalized it into the company culture. They actually created the Door Desk Award, which was given to employees who implemented significant cost-saving ideas. They elevated cheapness to a virtue.
But my absolute favorite award mentioned in the book is the Just Do It Award. It just perfectly captures the absurdity and the genius of this whole culture.
The Just Do It Award was created to recognize employees who showed extraordinary resourcefulness or, invented a brilliant workaround outside of their normal job duties. But in keeping with the theme of extreme frugality, Bezos dictated that the prize for this prestigious award had to be virtually free.
So what do they give them? A massive, ratty, used size 15 Nike sneaker. It literally belonged to a former employee, a guy named Dan Kreft, who just happened to be a former college basketball player.
So you have these brilliant engineers who might have written a script that saved the company millions of dollars in server costs. And they are called up in front of the company to be handed a smelly, used basketball shoe as their grand prize.
It's entirely symbolic, of course, but it sends a massive psychological message.
Yeah.
But this frugality had a very intense, almost dark side. It wasn't all just quirky awards and makeshift desks. It was aggressively enforced.
Extremely aggressive. There is a vivid anecdote in Brad Stone's book that illustrates just how aggressively it was enforced. Bezos walked into a conference room one day and noticed a newly installed, highly expensive flat-screen TV monitor mounted on the wall for video presentations. And he had not personally approved this purchase.
Because to Bezos, a massive TV in a conference room wasn't just a waste of money, it was a symptom of clumsy bureaucratic communication. It meant people were going to start giving glossy presentations instead of doing actual work.
So he lost his temper. He demanded that the expensive TVs be ripped out of the conference rooms immediately. But here is the critical detail. He intentionally ordered that the heavy metal wall mounts be left bolted to the walls.
Like a warlord leaving the skulls of his enemies on spikes outside the city gates. It's so intense.
Exactly. He left the empty metal mounts protruding from the drywall as a visible, permanent warning to everyone else in the building about the consequences of wasteful spending.
And it extended to employee benefits, too. In an era where tech companies were starting to pamper their employees, Amazon charged its own workers for parking. The company subsidized the $180 of a $220 monthly parking bill at their offices, making the employees eat the rest. And when a well-meaning executive suggested that the company purchase bus passes for the employees to ease the commuting burden, Bezos flat out refused.
And his reasoning was very telling. He didn't refuse just to save the cost of the bus passes. He refused because he didn't want employees feeling the psychological pressure to leave work early just to catch the last bus. Yeah, he wanted them relying on their own cars so they could work as late into the night as humanly possible without worrying about transit schedules.
Okay, I have to play the ghost of Ebenezer Scrooge here. I hear all of this, the door desks, the used shoes, ripping TVs off the walls, making employees pay for parking so they'll work until midnight. And I have to ask, doesn't this cross the line from being lean to just being cruel?
It's a fair question.
If I am a brilliant, highly sought-after software engineer, why on earth would I work at a place that makes me sit at a door and pay for parking when I could drive down the street to Google and get free gourmet lunches, on-site massages, and a beautiful ergonomic workspace? Doesn't this culture actively drive top talent away?
That is a completely valid question, and the answer is yes. It absolutely drove talent away. The research is very clear that Amazon could be a deeply unhappy place to work for many people. Employees often lived in perpetual fear of aggressive performance reviews, forced grading curves, and just grueling hours. Burnout was, and is, a real phenomenon there.
So why do it? Why purposefully make your company a difficult place to exist?
Because from a systemic, macro-level perspective, this harsh, frugal culture acts as a highly efficient filtration system. If we look at another concept from Jim Collins in his book Built to Last, he writes that truly visionary companies possess a rigid core ideology. And because that ideology is so strong, the company will expunge like a virus anyone who doesn't perfectly fit that mold.
Expunge like a virus. That is an intense phrase.
Amazon's brutal frugality and high-intensity environment act as a filter that automatically expunges the mercenaries.
The mercenaries.
Yeah, if you are a mercenary, someone who just wants a cushy tech job, free snacks, a comfortable work-life balance, and a big paycheck, you will hate Amazon and you will leave very quickly. The environment ensures that only the true missionaries remain.
The people who are pathologically obsessed with the work, obsessed with the customer, and deeply bought into the long-term vision.
Exactly. Furthermore, frugality isn't just about saving cash. It is an active forcing function for innovation. In Amazon's official leadership principles, they explicitly state that frugality breeds resourcefulness, self-sufficiency, and invention.
How so? Like, mechanically, how does that work?
Think about it. If a team runs into a massive logistical problem and they have an unlimited budget, the easiest solution is to just spend their way out of it.
Right. Throw money at it.
Buy more software, hire a consultant, build a bigger facility. But if you artificially constrain their resources to near zero, they cannot spend their way out. They are forced to think their way out.
Sir.
They have to invent a new algorithm, streamline a process, or completely rethink the architecture. The artificial scarcity forces genuine innovation.
So the suffering is the point. The friction is the point. It weeds out the weak and forces the strong to get incredibly creative.
Wow. Okay, so you apply weaponized frugality to keep your money lean. But as Amazon scaled and hired thousands of these missionary employees, they ran into another massive problem. Corporate inertia threatened to set in again, not from spending, but from management. To fight it, Bezos waged an absolute war on traditional corporate structure. This is perhaps one of his most radical and counterintuitive moves. As the company grew, different departments naturally needed to collaborate more. During an off-site executive retreat, a group of well-intentioned junior leaders stood up and gave a presentation on how the company could improve cross-departmental communication.
Which sounds like the most standard, positive corporate initiative ever.
Right. But as they are presenting, Bezos' face starts turning red. He suddenly interrupts them, stands up, and declares to the room, communication is a sign of dysfunction.
Stop. Stop right there. Every business school in the world, every management seminar, every self-help book teaches that communication is the holy grail of a successful organization. How can a lack of communication possibly be a good thing?
It sounds crazy, I know.
Think about a biological organism.
Yeah.
Normally, the brain, the management layer, communicates seamlessly with the hand, the team, to tell it exactly what to do. Without communication, the body falls apart. Bezos is essentially arguing for a body where the hand just ignores the brain and thinks for itself.
Your biological analogy is exactly right, but you have to look at the specific text that influenced Bezos' thinking to understand why he wanted the hand to act independently of the brain. He was heavily influenced by a classic software engineering book called The Mythical Man Month, written by Frederick Brooks.
Unpack that for us. What is the core argument there?
Brooks argues a very counterintuitive point. Adding manpower to a late software project actually delays its progress even further.
Wait, really?
Yes. Why? Because the time, energy, and money spent coordinating, onboarding, and communicating between individuals increases exponentially with every single new person you add to a team. If you have 50 people working on a piece of code, they spend 80% of their time in alignment meetings and only 20% of their time actually coding.
So more people equals more meetings equals less actual output.
Precisely. The overhead of communication destroys velocity. Bezos was also deeply influenced by a book called Creation by Steve Grand, who was a video game developer. Grand argued that you cannot design complex, intelligent life from the top down. It's impossible for a central brain to micromanage every cell. Instead, you build simple, primitive, cybernetic blocks like autonomous cells, and you let surprising, complex behaviors emerge organically on their own.
Okay, that is fascinating theoretical science. But how on earth do you translate top-down cybernetic theory into a corporate org chart for a retail company?
He did it by introducing the now famous two-pizza team rule. Bezos decreed that the entire company should be decentralized and reorganized into autonomous, independent groups that were small enough to be fed by two pizzas.
We were talking, what, 6 to 10 people maximum?
Exactly. Fewer than 10 people. Instead of a massive marketing department of 300 people waiting for orders from a VP, you have dozens of independent two-pizza teams, each given a specific problem to solve, often deliberately pitted against each other to see who could invent the best solution faster.
But wait, if you have hundreds of these tiny teams running around and they're explicitly told not to communicate with the central management, how do you know if a team is actually doing anything useful? How do you prevent total anarchy?
That is the genius of the system. To solve the accountability problem without adding middle management, Bezos required every single two-pizza team to propose its own fitness function.
Fitness function. Again, that sounds like a term pulled straight out of evolutionary biology. Survival of the fittest.
It is entirely biological. In Amazon's context, a fitness function was a linear mathematical equation that the team invented to measure its own impact without any ambiguity or subjective spin.
Give me a concrete example of how a team actually invents a mathematical equation for their daily jobs.
Let's take a hypothetical two-pizza team working on email marketing. In a normal company, their goal might be make the emails better, and they would spend hours in meetings trying to define what better means.
Right.
At Amazon, that team has to create an equation. Their fitness function might be the open rate of the emails multiplied by the average order size generated by those emails minus the number of customers who unsubscribed after receiving it.
So it spits out a single hard number at the end of the week.
Exactly. It removes all the narrative spin. You can't tell your boss, well, the open rates were low, but the synergy of the campaign was great. The math doesn't lie.
And who decides if that specific equation is the right thing to measure?
Bezos wanted to personally approve every single equation. He didn't want to manage what the team did on a Tuesday, but he demanded absolute control over how their success was measured. He acted as the natural selector of the ecosystem.
Wow.
Once the fitness function was approved, the team was set loose. They didn't need to ask permission. They didn't need to communicate with other teams. They just had to make their specific number go up.
According to the research, this structural shift was explicitly an anti-Microsoft philosophy. During that era, Microsoft was notorious for having massive layers of middle managers. You had managers managing managers. It slowed decision-making to a crawl. Bezos wanted a company composed entirely of independent entrepreneurial doers, not coordinators.
If we look at the bigger picture of system architecture, especially in software development, coordination is waste. If two engineering teams don't need to communicate with each other to launch a feature, it means their technological interfaces are clean, their goals are purely mathematical, and they have true, unencumbered autonomy.
Right.
It forces a highly decentralized, modular architecture where thousands of hands are moving incredibly fast on their own, guided only by the math of their fitness functions.
It's a brilliant way to scale without adding bureaucracy. But let's be real, complete silence is impossible. Even with autonomous two-pizza teams, some level of communication has to happen. You have to pitch new product lines, you have to request massive budget approvals, you have to explain failures. You can't run a multi-billion-dollar empire without any meetings.
True. But Bezos' philosophy was that if you were actively trying to minimize communication, the communication that does happen must be incredibly dense, precise, and flawless. The bandwidth is limited, so the signal must be crystal clear.
Which brings us to Amazon's most famous and perhaps most universally feared meeting rule. A rule that changed corporate culture forever.
The absolute banning of PowerPoint.
I think anyone listening to this right now who has ever been trapped in a windowless conference room, sitting through a 45-minute slide deck full of terrible clip art, endless bullet points, and corporate jargon just cheered in their car.
But Bezos didn't ban PowerPoint just because it was boring.
No, he banned it because it actively conceals lazy thinking. Bezos argued that PowerPoint is a fundamentally imprecise communication mechanism. It is, in his exact words, fantastically easy to hide behind bullet points.
Think about the last presentation you sat through at your office. How much of that hour was just someone reading vague bullet points that meant absolutely nothing?
Exactly. When you use a slide deck, you can put two completely disconnected, logically flawed ideas on the same slide. And because they have little matching bullet points next to them, the audience subconsciously assumes they're logically connected.
Yeah, that happens all the time. The presenter's charisma papers over the massive holes in the strategy.
So if you strip away the projector and the bullet points, what fills the vacuum in the boardroom? You can't just have executives shouting ideas at each other.
He replaced it with something vastly more demanding: the 6-page narrative. Whatever an employee or a team wanted to propose a new idea, pitch a new product, or request a budget, they had to write a deeply researched, fully formed 6-page prose document, complete with rigorous footnotes and data appendices.
6 pages of dense, narrative text, no bullet points allowed.
Furthermore, they were often required to format this narrative as a mock press release. This is an incredible structural hack. Before a single line of code is written, before a single dollar of budget is approved, the team has to write the public announcement of the product as if it were launching tomorrow.
They are forced to work backward from the customer's perspective.
Precisely. It forces the team to immediately confront the ultimate value proposition. If the press release sounds boring, if you can't articulate why the customer should care in a headline, then the product itself is going to be boring. It prevents teams from building complex technology just for the sake of technology.
Okay, so I want to know how these meetings actually operate.
Yeah.
Because it sounds bizarre. You walk into a conference room with Jeff Bezos and his senior leadership team. You have your 6-page essay printed out. Instead of walking up to a screen and clicking a remote, what actually happens?
It starts with silence. Complete, absolute silence.
It's a library.
Like a study hall. The documents are passed out around the table, and for the first 15 to 30 minutes of the executive meeting, nobody speaks. Everyone sits there and reads the narrative silently, making notes in the margins.
But put yourself in the shoes of a mid-level manager for a second. Imagine the sheer intimidation of that room. It's like a silent study hall that suddenly transforms into a Roman gladiator arena.
It really is.
You are handing a high school-style essay to one of the richest, most demanding, intellectually aggressive men in the world. And you have to sit there in silence and watch him read your words in real time. You can see his face reacting to your logic. And according to the research in the book, the feedback when the silence finally broke was often brutal.
Very brutal, because prose forces linear logic. You cannot fake a transition in a written paragraph the way you can skip over a logical gap between two slides. If your thinking is flawed, the sentences will not make sense.
Wow, nowhere to hide.
Exactly. In one memorable anecdote from the book, Bezos reads a mock newsletter proposed by a team. He finishes reading and he just shreds them. He tells them the design philosophy is too complicated, the headlines aren't punchy enough, and he flat out tells the executives, if you were doing this as a blogger, you would starve.
Ouch. He completely dismantled their ability to communicate. But I have to ask the obvious question here. Doesn't this rigorous literary approach grind the actual speed of business to a halt?
It seems like it would.
Right. If every minor feature update or strategic shift requires a perfectly crafted 6-page term paper that takes weeks to write and edit, how does a massive tech company get anything done quickly? Isn't speed the ultimate weapon?
That is the core paradox of the 6-page narrative. It absolutely intentionally slows down the pitch. It might take a 2-pizza team 3 weeks of agonized debate just to finalize their 6-page document, but it massively, exponentially speeds up the execution. Because all the fatal flaws, the bad assumptions, the structural issues, and the misaligned goals are ironed out on paper in that brutal meeting before any real money is spent.
Oh, I get it.
In a normal company, a flashy PowerPoint gets approved quickly, but then the engineering team spends 6 months building the wrong thing because the initial logic was flawed. At Amazon, once that dense document is finally approved, the team can sprint at top speed. Everyone in the room knows exactly what they're building, exactly why they are building it, and exactly how success will be measured.
So you intentionally suffer tremendous friction up front, so you can fly without resistance on the back end. It's like a fascinating trade-off.
It is the ultimate manifestation of moving slow to move fast.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground here. Let's pull this all together. What does this actually mean for you, the listener, navigating your own professional world? Let's recap this masterclass and aggressive execution from Brad Stone's The Everything Store.
First, When faced with a massive life or business decision, use the Regret-Minimization Framework. Step out of your biological fear of immediate loss by projecting yourself to age 80. View your life as a finished story and choose the path that minimizes historical regret.
Second, understand the mechanics of your own economic engine. Build a customer-obsessed flywheel where every single action fuels the next step, and protect the trust of that flywheel fiercely, even if it means sending a terrifying question mark email to shut down a highly profitable but internally flawed revenue stream.
Third, weaponize frugality. Stop viewing budget constraints as a hindrance. Use extreme artificial constraints to force genuine innovation, and use a harsh culture to filter out the mercenaries who aren't deeply committed to your core mission.
Fourth, wage war on corporate inertia by shrinking your teams. 2 pizzas maximum. Eliminate the endless overhead of communication by decentralizing power and giving those small teams clear, unforgiving mathematical fitness functions.
And finally, force deep critical thinking by banning bullet points. Require 6-page narratives that work backward from the customer's perspective to ensure you are solving real problems, not just building shiny technology.
And the beauty of this is that you do not need a multi-billion-dollar R&D budget to apply these principles. You can sit down tonight, open a blank document, and write a mock press release for the side project you've been dreaming about. You can use the 80-year-old regret test for your next career move tomorrow morning. You can mandate that your next team meeting starts with 10 minutes of silent reading instead of a slide deck.
However, there is one final, highly provocative thought from the book that we should leave the listener with to ponder. During the height of Amazon's massive growth, Bezos wrote an internal memo that was titled Amazon.love.
What was the premise of the memo?
He was analyzing the corporate landscape, looking at companies that were universally loved by the public brands like Apple, Disney, or Nike, and comparing them to companies that were highly successful but widely feared or resented like Walmart, Microsoft, or Exxon.
Interesting comparison.
Bezos wrote that he desperately wanted Amazon to be loved. He wanted the company to be viewed as a pioneering explorer inventing the future, not feared as a ruthless, monopolistic conqueror.
But the reality of their execution begs a massive question. Can you actually be both?
That is the tension at the heart of the company. Bezos constantly claims that Amazon is a pure missionary company, solely obsessed with the customer, and not a mercenary one obsessed with destroying competitors. Yet, as the ultimate unstore scales into the everything company, they frequently deploy incredibly aggressive, purely mercenary tactics.
A perfect example from the book is the Gazelle Project. This was an internal initiative where Amazon explicitly approached small, vulnerable book publishers the way a cheetah pursues a sickly gazelle, leveraging Amazon's massive market share to extract incredibly punishing financial terms from these small businesses.
Right. It was highly effective execution, but it was ruthless.
So this is the question we leave you with. As you scale your own ambitions, is it truly possible to be a ruthless, industry-destroying disruptor, executing these intense, zero-sum strategies, and still be universally loved as a pioneer? Or does the relentless mechanical execution required to build an everything company eventually cost you your corporate soul? It's a complex legacy, and it's something for you to deeply ponder as you build your own flywheel.
The strategies we've discussed today are undeniably effective. They rebuilt global commerce. But the culture and the legacy they create are incredibly complicated.
That wraps up this Decode deep dive into the relentless machinery of Jeff Bezos. If you enjoyed dissecting these strategies with us, please hit subscribe and drop a comment below with your absolute favorite Amazon corporate quirk. Was it the door desks, the used basketball shoe award, the terrifying silent reading sessions? We want to know what stood out to you, and we highly, highly recommend you go by Brad Stone's The Everything Store to get the full, unfiltered experience of these wild stories. Until next time, watch out for that corporate inertia. Keep your team small, keep your doors flat, and put your bullet points in the trash.